You are good to go, Brother Denny.
All right, brother. Thank you. Welcome back to our study of Ecclesiastes. I hope that you've been enjoying this great book. It certainly is one of my favorite Old Testament studies. There's so much to unpack. There's so much that is a part of this great book. If you were asked the question, what is the meaning of your life? What is it that gives your life meaning? How would you answer that? Well, you know as well as I that a lot of people in this world would give a very secular viewpoint to that question. Their life is defined by what they own. Their life is defined by what they've done. Maybe their life is defined by business success. Maybe their life is defined by their family legacy. Solomon is saying, though, that all of those things are vanity because none of that really is what defines who we are. And none of that really captures what makes our life significant. And so, this book, which is a sermon preached by the wisest man that ever lived outside of Jesus Christ, Solomon, and the God given wisdom that he had is given to us what is the meaning of life. And if you haven't already done so, I encourage you to underline chapter 2 and verse 3, because that is the verse in which Solomon unveils what really is going on in this book. He's trying to identify what good there is for men to do during the few years of their life, that he can answer the question, this is the meaning of life. This is what you should be working on, focusing on, concentrating on. And I don't know about you, but I need that kind of direction in my life because it is so easy to get caught up in the dog eat dog world in which we live, where everything is topsy-turvy, upside down, and what should be minor things become major things, and what should become major, really important things become minor things, or maybe they don't become even significant things in somebody's life at all. And so in this book, Solomon is helping us navigate through life with God, as opposed to the futility of life without God. And so if we walk away from this book with anything at all, it would be this, that our life has meaning when it has God, and that our life has no meaning, no value, no significance whatsoever if God is not a part of our lives. And that's a pretty bold statement to make. But to me, there's a high degree of sadness in that, because how many people in the world really have God? Now, there are a number of people that claim to have God, that claim to have a relationship with him. But as our Lord Jesus said, that if you love me, you will keep my commandments. And as the Apostle John said in 1 John chapter 2, the one who says, I have come to know him and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, in him the love of God has truly been perfected. So our relationship with God is something that is identifiable by our obedience, by our keeping the commandments. You can say you love God, but if you don't follow what God has commanded, then those are just words, empty words. And so Solomon is leading us to the conclusion, which is in chapter 12. He says, when all has been heard, the conclusion is this: fear God and keep his commandments, for such is the whole duty of man. Well, this applies to every person, he says. So he does discover the answer to his quest, of which he's used all of his wisdom and all of the labor that he has exerted in order to come up with that all important question about the meaning of life. Okay, well, we're in chapter 5, and it's a chapter that I could camp in for a long time because to me it hits on one of the fundamental aspects of our life with God, and that's worship. And that um, it's easy for us to take worship for granted, for us to maybe not give it the kind of thought, effort, preparation, discipline that we need for the worship to really be that which is pleasing to God. And so Solomon begins the whole discussion here in chapter 5 with these very powerful words: guard your steps. As you're going to the place of worship, worshiping God, you better guard those steps. You better think about what it is that you're doing. You better think about where it is that you are going. Because as he says very clearly, you draw near to listen. That's what we're doing. And this is not the time for us to talk about what we feel, what we think, and our opinion about this, and our attitude about that. It's time that, like in Habakkuk 2 and verse 20, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. And so we're there to hear God, to hear what God says. And that's why preachers need to preach the word. And that's why we in the audience need to demand that our preachers preach the word, because we're here to hear, we are in attendance to hear what our God has to say. But you need to guard your steps, because you could easily offer to God what Solomon calls the sacrifice of fools. Oh, it's a sacrifice. It's something that's being offered up to God. But the person is a fool. And the reason he is a fool is because he has not given thought to what it is that he is actually offering God, and whether God is going to be pleased with that. You see, there's an assumption there, and it's a terrible assumption, that God is going to be pleased with anything that we offer, that somehow God is just pleased that we're worshiping him at all, when in fact that couldn't be further from the truth. This is not the way God feels about it. As a matter of fact, have you ever considered the thought that what a worshiper might do, and maybe even what we have done, is not only something that is rejected by God, but it is actually sin, what we've done. We've actually sinned in our attempt to worship God. Notice again what Solomon says in the last of verse 1. He says, "For they do not know that they are doing evil." Wow. That they're not even aware of the fact that not only are they offering something to God that he has not asked for, or it's being done in the wrong way, but it's evil. It's sin, what it is that they are doing. And so point number 2 on the PowerPoint, and we've already gone through this, but we're trying to catch up so that we kind of know where we are when we left class last time. He says, "Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought." All right, so in word, what it is that you say, or in thought, in what it is that you are thinking. Now, so it's not just what we say as we are worshiping, but as our mind, our thoughts, truly with God, truly dedicated toward God. You know, for example, if a brother is leading us in prayer, where is our mind? Are his words our words, and our mind is fully engaged in the prayer? Or are we combining both words and thought in our songs. So we're singing, so there are words that are coming out of our mouth, but is our brain engaged? Are we thinking about the words of that song? I pointed out last time how we're fully capable, especially for songs that we have sung all of our lives, to sing that song from beginning to end and not think about a single word in that song, not word one. Well, that's the sacrifice of fools, and God rejects that kind of worship. So he says, let your words be few. First of all, we're there to listen. We already made that point. But now, in order to emphasize that point, let your words be those that are very few, and what words you do say are those words that have been carefully filtered and thought through. Because he said, God's up there and we're down here. He's great, we're not. He's all powerful and we are most certainly weak. And so think about your place. Think about who you are in respect to God. David said in Psalm 8, what is man that thou art mindful of him? David recognized the smallness of man in comparison to the greatness of God. And so there should be some humility that we bring with our worship, recognizing how great God is. He says that fools are those that take forever to express themselves. They're the ones that through many words, he says in verse 3, are stumbling and babbling and because they haven't really thought it through. One of the things I've learned in all of the years that I've been a teacher is that when I'm asking students to give an answer to a question that they were given ahead of time, that they are fumbling around and they don't really know how to answer the question. And so they're grasping at straws. Well, it's pretty obvious that they had not put in the proper preparation to answer that question. So also is our worship. We can be such where we're throwing a lot of words at God, but those words are not coming from the heart and really not coming from the mind because they were not well thought out. So we have got to make sure that what it is that we're offering to God is that which is few, concise, heartfelt, sincere, and was prepared. We thought ahead of time about what it is that we're saying. He says in verse 3, for the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of a fool through many words. He uses here an ancient expression that we are not totally certain as to the meaning of what Solomon is saying. Most scholars see from this the idea that the gods, if they were pagan, or the Lord God, if they were Jewish, would communicate to them through dream. And so they're tossing and turning, and they're really struggling to fall asleep and dream so that they might get a message from God. Well, that energy expanded to dream is equivalent to the wasted effort that a fool has in trying to worship God with many words. Logic would say that the fool would know to be quiet, but he doesn't. He needs to learn to be quiet. But his failure to be quiet is, in fact, what makes him a fool. And so the person that's longing for a dream, well, he's a fool too, because that's not the way God is going to communicate with him, is through some dream. And then in verse 4, when you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it. Again, we're kind of redigging some material that we covered at the end of the last class. What is a vow? A vow is a promise. It is striking a deal with God where if God will do this, then you will do that. And you set the terms of the vow with God. And so you commit yourself to your part, and you are committing God to his part. And if he doesn't do his part, then you are under no obligation to do your part. But if God does, in fact, do his part, then you have to make sure that you do your part. And there are two aspects to your paying a vow that God did his part in that vow. First of all is the time. Don't be late in paying it, Solomon says. There is a protocol in which once the vow had been fulfilled on God's part, you were obligated to make haste to do your part. And depending on what it was that you promised, you need to do it as soon as possible, maybe even that day. If, for example, you promised to give X number of dollars to the temple, well, if you live in Jerusalem, then you probably ought to be making a trip to the temple that afternoon. If you live outside of the temple, then you need to make preparation to journey to the temple so that you could make payment and fulfill your end of the vow right away. All right, so this is a kind of relationship that God liked. It was a part of Mosaic law, and there was even a sacrifice. It was one of the three peace offerings of the Mosaic law, and they were called peace offerings because all is well between the worshiper and God. So you had the thank offering was a peace offering. You just want to thank God for a specific blessing or just for general blessings. That would be a good thing to do today, wouldn't it? And then you had what was called a free will offering, where you are just wanting to give to God. And then you had the votive offering, which was based upon a vow that had been made. And so the priest is going to ask you a question when you come to make this sacrifice, this votive offering. Did you do your part of the vow? Because offering the sacrifice is not your part of the vow. That's what is the completion of the vow. So he says, don't be late in paying it, because he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. You promised, then you deliver. You come through. God never made you commit to giving that money or whatever it was that was vowed. You are the one that obligated yourself to that. Therefore, pay what you vow. As a matter of fact, he says in verse 5 that it would be better that you should not vow than you should vow and not pay. You see, it's twisted thinking to believe that God is just happy that I struck up this deal with him in the first place, that I have offered him this vow. And so even though I'm not exactly going to be able to follow through with my part, God's still going to be happy with that. No, he is not. You made a promise. You made a commitment. Vows are very serious to God. And so don't offer the sacrifice of fools, the failure to think about your words, failure to really give serious thought about, am I really going to be able to pay this? You know, maybe this was a part of a movie. I'm not quite sure if this is true. I just remember the illustration of a guy that was drowning in the ocean, and he makes a promise to God. God, if If you'll deliver me from drowning, then I'll give you $1 million. And well, as he's floundering in the water, he is able to move a little bit closer to shore, and he can now feel the bottom. And so now, God, if I still can make it safely to the shore, I'll give you $500,000. And then as he is now got the water up to his shoulders, and it's more likely he's going to be okay. God, if I can make it to shore, I'm going to give you $250,000. Anyway, but the closer he gets to shore, the smaller his promise becomes. Well, that would be a sacrifice of fools. He's trying to change the stipulations of the agreement that he has made with God. Pay what you vow, he said. That's what you vowed. That's what you should pay. And it would have been better off for you not to have made the vow in the first place. So we are making the point that God would rather you not worship at all than to worship in a way that offends him, worship in a way that is thoughtless and really without the heart that God wants in our worship. Then he says in verse 6, do not let your speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the work of your hands? Okay, so do not let your speech cause you to sin. Here, your speech is where you made a promise to God. You made a vow to God, and now you're trying to back off and excuse your way out of the obligation of that vow. When he says, do not say in the presence of the messenger of God, or the messenger, your translation may say, that messenger is probably referring to the priest at the temple, because now the priest is going to ask, did you fulfill your part of the vow that you made with God? And he's do not at this point say, well, not exactly, priest. That vow was a mistake. And so I want to offer an offering to God anyway, and a kind of an apology offering. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to fulfill my part of the vow. Said, don't go to the messenger of God and say that it was a mistake, because that's going to elicit two responses from God. First of all, if you look at the text there in the last part of verse 6, it's going to make God angry. You don't want to make God angry, but this makes God angry. And again, it's because you didn't have to make the vow. You made the choice to offer this vow. And so that angers God, that now you struck a bargain with him, a deal with him. He fulfilled his part, and now you're trying to get out of your part. That just makes God mad. And then the second response from God is destroy the work of your hands. You see, God blessed you by doing his part of the vow. And so now what are going to be the consequences? Well, there's going to be a judgment of some kind where God is going to destroy the work of your hands. What prosperity might have come your way is now going to be poverty. What success is going to be failure. The work of your hands, or the things that you're trying to do, the things that you're trying to accomplish, are now going to be for naught. And it's all because God is angry, and now God is punishing. So your speech should not cause you to sin. Now, let's make a couple of modern applications to this. we say things in our prayers and in our songs that, again, we could say um, and not mean. There are a number of songs that have words that are, we're committing ourselves. Take my life and let it be. Mold me and shape me. Uh, we sing these songs, and there are a lot of them that have the kind of idea of where, God, I'm offering you myself. I'm pledging to you that I'm going to dedicate myself to you and to your word. And well, have you really thought that through? And is it really a sincere feeling that is in your heart? Because if you're saying, um, I'm giving my life to you, or you're saying that I am committing myself to you, well, then you better mean that, because it is a commitment that's being made. You're saying, it's coming words off of your own lips, that you're going to give God that kind of love, that kind of commitment, that kind of dedication. Um, if we don't do it, if we walk away from those words without really even thinking about what we just committed to, that angers God. And according to this verse, it could turn God against us, where before he might have been ready to bless us, now he is going to destroy the work of our hands. This isn't meant to scare us, but it is meant to get us to make sure that we understand how important and how significant worship is. It amazes me and it troubles me when I hear some in the church today that try to disparage the acts of worship that are based upon the word of God in the first place. We did just create this idea of singing uh, and making melody in our hearts to the Lord. We didn't. That's what the Bible says. The idea of coming together in prayer, that it's a sacrifice that's being offered to God, like the Hebrews writer says. We didn't come up with that. That's from God. The Lord's Supper, well, just as Paul explains in 1 Corinthians 11, that was instituted by the Lord on the night that he was betrayed. So we didn't come up with that. These are acts of worship. The assembling of ourselves together itself is something that was designed and commanded by God, Hebrews 10 and verse 25. And so when people minimize the importance of our assembly, when people minimize the importance of the various acts of worship, that's a very dangerous thing. Just as we're seeing in Ecclesiastes 5, how dangerous it is for someone who doesn't guard their steps as they're coming before God to worship. God knows that we do not automatically know what pleases him. Our worship is going to please him because he has told us what pleases him. And I'm thankful that he has, because when men presume to offer God what they assume pleases him, it ends up being woefully corrupt, because they end up making an idol. Maybe they even go so far as you've got temples and temple prostitutes and male prostitutes. It's men have shown through the centuries how we can twist and distort this idea of worship when we're the ones that create what happens in worship. God had given the rule for vows. He had given the regulations and what needed to happen when it comes to vows. And so anything outside of what God has asked is an insult to God. You know, we learn that with Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, where they presumed to offer God something that he had not commanded, the text says. All right, so they offered unapproved fire, and God was so displeased that he sent fire from heaven and killed both Nadab and Abihu. And we learn, as Moses explains in Leviticus 10 and verse 3, that they did not show the proper respect for God, honor for God, and those who are going to come near me, I will be treated as holy, God said. Well, they presumed to come near him. That's a phrase that means to approach him in worship. But they most certainly did not treat him as holy. So we can sin in worshiping God in a way that is not what he prescribed. When we do that, we're lacking humility. And when we do that, we are angering God. And we certainly don't want to do that. So he says in verse 7, as he's wrapping up this discussion, for in many dreams and in many words, there is emptiness. So let's suppose the guy that we were talking about just a minute ago that is tossing and turning on the bed because he wants to have a dream so bad. So let's suppose that he has several dreams over successive nights. Well, God is not promising to speak to him through dreams. That's not how God worked. And so those dreams, which he's putting so much weight on, are as empty as his thoughtless, repetitive words that he's offering to God. So he says there's emptiness in all of that. And then he wraps up with some very important words. Rather fear God. And that word fear, we talked about it before, and we'll talk about it again, especially when we get to chapter 12, is a word that means fright, terror, a phobia. Fear God. It is not saying respect God. There's a different Hebrew word that means respect. This is not it. This is a word that means to be afraid. Be afraid to offer something to God that is outside of what he has asked for. Be afraid to worship God carelessly, thoughtlessly, with words that are really not thought through, because you're going to anger God and you don't want to do that. All right, then as we move on to verses 8 and 9, he wants to talk about corrupt governments. And their corruption is going to be manifested in a number of different ways. He says, if you see oppression of the poor, denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight. All right, so first of all, men in power oppress the poor. These are people, as Solomon pointed out in chapter 4 and verse 1, that they don't really have a defender. They don't really have anybody that can run to their defense and make sure that this oppression stops and that the oppressor is held accountable for what it is they're doing. But the truth of the matter is they're poor. And since they're poor, they can't afford the protection. They can't afford what wealthy people have in order to provide for themselves to make sure that they're not oppressed. And so, as my brothers used to say when we were growing up, that's easy picking. That's easy picking. That's low-hanging fruit to pick on somebody that's poor because, there's no recourse. They don't have the power. And so a corrupt government is going to oppress, take advantage of the poor. And then second corrupt thing that happens with government is denial of justice. Boy, what a timely point today as we watch the news and we are constantly being confronted with government corruption, not only with our own government, but governments all over the world are being called out and are being identified for their corruption. The Bear Valley Bible Institute has preacher training schools all over the world, and in many of the countries in Africa. Well, one of the things that we have seen so frequently is how governments have abused their power, they have oppressed the poor, and they have denied justice to those who have been mistreated, typically been mistreated by maybe the government officials themselves or the military. And so they're crying out for justice, and there it's fallen on deaf ears that the government is not really interested in that which is fair, that which is right. And then the third way is the denial of righteousness. This is not a denial of righteous people, although that is certainly something that happens. But instead, what he's talking about here is they are pushing away the principles of right and wrong, those things that were given by God. The basis of a civil society are in the truths that are given in God's word. And any government that would base their laws upon the principles given in God's word is truly going to be a fair, just, and a civil society. But when God's principles are abandoned and men of power are going to start making their own rules and their own laws, then they are going to deny what is right versus what is wrong. What is the correct way of doing something versus something that is not correct. And Solomon says, don't be shocked at the sight. Man, I wish he hadn't said that, because you would hope that, maybe there will actually be some governments that would not fall into this description. But this is so common, so frequent, and it is universal. Solomon says, don't let it surprise you. Don't go, wow, I can't believe that this government is so corrupt, because for as long as there have been governments, there's been corruption. Men do not know how to use power. I know we made that point earlier. We make it again now. Once they have power, then that power is abused. And so don't be shocked at the sight. And then he explains some of the politics that are part of these three corrupt acts. One official, he says, watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. So what he is describing is a network of corrupt individuals that they have each other's back, is how we might describe it. Sometimes we talk about the good old boys club, and that's what these government officials are. That really what they're doing is they're all protecting themselves because they have this network of corruption that ultimately is going to benefit them. And so Solomon is saying, you see this corrupt government official, and so you have hope that the guy above him is going to make it right. Well, they're in cahoots with each other. They're on the same team. They're in partnership. And so that higher official is equally corrupt. And then say, well, I'll go above his head. I'll go to somebody else that is more powerful than he. Well, in all likelihood, he is as corrupt as well. But then we get to the last statement that he makes. There are higher officials over them. Some versions actually make that singular. There is a high official or a higher official over them. And so there are two interpretations. One is that you can go all the way up the chain of authority and ultimately land on the most powerful government official at all, the president, the king, and in all likelihood, he's corrupt as well. And so where do you go after that? You've kind of reached a dead end. And so don't be shocked at the sight. The whole group of them are all corrupt. But there is an alternative interpretation, and I actually lean toward the alternative interpretation, and that is that ultimately the buck stops with God. God is the ultimate official. He is the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. And as the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, he is going to see that all these officials he's going to see what all of them are doing, and he is going to hold them accountable for what it is that they have done. The best government is the one that recognizes that they too have to answer to God for the decisions that they make. Solomon himself said in Proverbs 25 and verse 5, take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne will be established in, and here's our word, righteousness. So get the bad people away, surround the king with good people, and that will be established in righteousness. Again, that was Proverbs 25 and verse 5. And you might also note Proverbs 20 and verse 8. So this is a principle that we see. And the answer is to the principle of corrupt governments is to get in that government good, righteous people. I've heard some people say that Christians should not be involved in government. They should stay out of being involved in what is happening in government. But I don't subscribe to that idea at all. As a matter of fact, I wish more Christians had determined to be involved in government, because then we could hopefully have some of those good officials that we were talking about that can influence those who are in power. So it's one of those things that they're going to have to answer to God. And I wish that every ruler, every government official would recognize that, yeah, they're in a position of power, and they can certainly abuse that power, but know that you are going to have to answer to God for the way that you use that power and that authority. To him whom much is given will much be required, is one of those biblical principles that we see frequently. And then he says, verse 9, after all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. All right, so if you actually can end up with a good king, a king that is not interested in oppressing the poor and denial of justice, but is actually wanting to make decisions that are best for the people. And ultimately, those decisions are running the government so the land, the people can be as productive as they possibly can be for the benefit of all. And so if the government uses its power in order to reduce the amount of crime, for example, if the government uses its power to make trade agreements with other nations where they can bring in products that are necessary for the advancement of the nation, then those are good things. Now, some commentators will say, so even a corrupt government can do some things that are good for the people if they'll eventually make decisions that will enable the land to be productive. That might be what Solomon is getting at here, although I have trouble seeing how that particular point advances his overall point. I think his overall point is life with God is much better, even when our government officials recognize that the highest official is God, and he's going to hold them accountable. So as a good governor, they're going to make decisions that really have the best interest of the people in their minds. And I think that is really the point that he's making here. And then another part of life with God is money. However, you'll notice in verses 10 through 17 that there is no reference to God. It's going to be after he completes this section that he's going to come back around and he's going to talk about God. So money without God is basically what we're looking at here. And then he's going to go from there to talking about, okay, well, what is the right perspective if you've got money and you have God? All right. What he wants to do, he wants to give us 7 aspects about money, or reasons why money or wealth are vain. Okay. Because as we all know, money is the number one draw of people. That is their goal. That's what they desire. That's what they love, according to Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. All right. So he who loves money, that's the way he starts this out in verse 10, will not be satisfied with money. All right. So the first observation then about money is it's not going to satisfy. A person can have money, they can have lots of money, but there's no real contentment that is found in that money. You know, there are stories of men that were extremely wealthy, multi-millionaires, who died miserable, some of which committed suicide, and they were unbelievably wealthy and lived in mansions. They had the fanciest cars, but they were miserable. And the reason is because money is not the answer to life. And we're always saying, man, if I just had a little bit more. Well, if you had a little bit more, you wouldn't be satisfied with that little bit more. You would say, man, if I had just a little bit more than that, even that. Well, if you end up getting that, it's still not going to satisfy. And so Solomon is observing one of the fundamental truths about money is it doesn't matter how much one has, but the attitude that he has with what he does have, whether it's a lot or whether it's a little. That's really the key to satisfaction. We learn to love what we have. And when we love what we have, then we're going to be satisfied with that. The problem is where we're not satisfied. We do have what money we have, but it's just not enough. We just need a little bit more. And if I could have a little bit more, then that would enable me to do this or that. Well, Solomon, who was the richest man on the earth, would certainly know what he's talking about here, that money cannot satisfy. And that's why he says in the last part of verse 10, this too is vanity. Money itself, the desire for money, the longing for more money, it's striving after wind. It's vain. It is an absolutely worthless, dead-end type of endeavor. Now, are you hearing that? I'm hearing, and I need to remind myself, maybe you do too, of what Solomon is saying. I know I've been greatly blessed, and I got to be careful not to fall into the trap of wishing I had more. God has blessed me. Maybe most, if not all of you, could say, yeah, amen to that. God has blessed me too. Are we satisfied, though? If we never make any more than what we have right now, can we live with that? Can we be satisfied with that? As a matter of fact, Paul is going to go so far as to say that whether you're godly or not, is dependent upon your attitude of contentment. And so if you have food and covering, with this, he says, you shall be content. Well, I don't know about you, but I've got food, even more than I need. I've got covering. And so that should be enough for me to be content and for you to be content as well. All right, the second observation he makes about money, verse 11, when good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what is the advantage to their owners except to look on? Without revealing too many specifics, I knew someone that won, well, actually, it was their parents who won the state lottery. And so they became instant millionaires. And so this person, who actually was one of my students, was very excited about what had happened to her mom and dad. And, all of us were excited for her. About 3 or 4 weeks later, I saw this student again, had a chance to ask, how are your parents doing? And her demeanor immediately changed. And she said, their life has been miserable ever since they won that lottery. I go, what do you mean? She said, well, it started with people coming to the house at all hours of the day and night, people begging, looking for handouts. And so it started with phone calls, people calling, asking if they would give to this cause or that cause. And a lot of the people that were calling were relatives, long lost relatives, people they didn't even know were relatives, were calling, wanting a piece of that pie. And then there would be people that were coming to the house. So they had to shut off their phone. And then eventually they had to sell their house and move to an undisclosed location in another state. And so they had to leave their friends, they had to leave their church home, and move to a totally new place, and then basically live in somewhat obscurity. Otherwise, all of those people would follow them to where they were going. Well, this is exactly the point that Solomon is making, is when someone knows of someone else that's got money, they're descend upon him like vultures. And the only way the vultures fly away is when there's no more meat on the bones. And the only way these people will leave the other people alone that had the money is when there's no more money. And so when Solomon says, so what advantage to their owner except to look on? You just watch the vultures just pick apart everything that you have, and then you're left with nothing. So would you have been better off not having the money in the first place? You see, logic would say, no, give me the money. I'll take the money and I'll try to deal with it. But Solomon knows what he's talking about, and history has repeated this story over and over again. As a matter of fact, I asked this student some more about her parents, and she said, my dad has said more than once, I wish we'd have never won that money. We just want our old lives back. Well, that's what happens. And then the third observation about money in verse 12, the sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much. All right, let's break this verse into its parts. First of all, the working man is, after a long day of work, his head hits a pillow, and I mean, he's gone. he is sleeping soundly because he is exhausted from a long day of work. And it really didn't make any difference whether during the course of that day he had a pretty good amount of food to eat or a little bit of food to eat. The very fact that he was working, he has a good night of sleep. The rich man, though, doesn't need to work. He's got all sorts of money. And so he's basically lazed around all day and he's stuffing his face with food. And so when nighttime comes, he has a terrible time sleeping. I was reading a story about one sleep specialist that was dealing with Hollywood elites, in which there are so many of them that are given sleeping pills because they cannot sleep. And how many times have we heard about famous people who were constantly on sleeping pills? Well, the rich, he says, the full stomach of the rich does not allow them to sleep. They That's all they've done is lay around, basically do nothing all day long. And so it impacts the sleep. The working man, he's just sleeping away because he was so tired. Well, he's got the better of the two. And then in verse 13, the fourth point that he makes about money, there is a grievous evil which I have seen under the sun. All right, here is another universal principle that Solomon has seen. Riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. Now we understand that if a rich man hoards money, when there are other people around him that are so hurting, so needy, that he's hurting them. But the truth of the matter is, he is hurting himself more than he's hurting them. Jesus said that it was more blessed to give than to receive in Acts 20. Well, this one is misusing money because he's hoarding it. He is stockpiling it, and there's no reason for him to be stockpiling that money. There is no purpose for him doing that. So the sense is this guy's watching over his money in a very unhealthy way. He is like a mother hen that is over the chicks, just so protective, and that's going to end up ruining his life. I mentioned in one of the earlier classes that for a number of years I was a financial planner. I worked with people on estate planning and how to invest their money and so on, so they could have a secure retirement. When the stock market is fluctuating, especially on a downward trend, those were not good days to be a financial planner because my phone was ringing off the hook. People can't sleep. They're worried. They're miserable. How am I ever going to recover from this? And it's like their lives are just wrapped up in their money. Well, that's what Solomon says when it leads to his hurt. So he doesn't even mention how the wealth was obtained. And probably at this point, it doesn't matter. He's just talking about now that the wealth was obtained, he is so worried about that money that it's really, he's hoarding it and it's hurting him and it hurts others. And then in verse 14, he makes a fifth observation. When those riches were lost. All right, so had the riches that were gained. Now the riches were lost through what he calls a bad investment. Now, your translation may say, or your footnote may say, an evil investment or an evil task. And this particular Hebrew word is not a word that is used in reference to sinful evil, like something that originates from the devil. It was just a bad, ill-advised, foolish type of investment. And as a result, he loses all of that money that he had. Now, this could be referring to something that is sinful, like say he lost his money through gambling, or an ill-advised investment, or a business venture that turned sour. There was an unforeseen reversal of circumstances, maybe even something that was beyond his control. Uh, Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. The point is that it was lost. And so now the person has the mental anguish to go along with the physical anguish of dealing with poverty. He says there are some other problems to the fact that he has now lost that money. He had fathered a son, and there is nothing to support him. So now he once had all sorts of money to support himself and a family. And now, because of his bad investment, his foolish investment, or whatever it was, he doesn't have anything even to support his own family. Then in verse 15, Solomon states a principle that Job first said in Job chapter 1 and verse 21. And Paul is going to say later in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 7. And it's the principle of you're going to leave this earth with exactly what you came into this earth with, and that is nothing. All right. He says, and he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. All right. So as Job said, naked I come into this world, naked I shall return. That's the way it is. You do not go into eternity with anything Solomon says that you can carry in your hand. You go and face God on the day of judgment with nothing in your hand, nothing of a physical nature. All you're going to bring with you is the deeds that you did in this life. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10, whether good or evil, what Jesus said in John 5 verses 28 and 29, whether you did good or evil. So that's what you're going to take with you, the kind of person that you were, the kind of character that you were, but nothing in your hand. You know, one of my favorite illustrations that really impacted me when I was much younger was the story of a man that came up to the gate, and Peter is there, but he's got a bag, and Peter said, "No, you can't bring anything in." He says, "I have got to bring this in. Please let me bring this bag in." And Peter says, "No, we don't let anybody." And the guy said, "Please, Peter, please, this is so important to me. Let me bring this in." And so Peter says, "All right, I'll let you bring it in." And so he brings his bag in to heaven, and he sees God, and God said, "Welcome to heaven. What do you have in the bag?" Of course, God already knows. And the guy reaches in his bag and he pulls out a beautiful gold bar. And God says, "You brought pavement?" Because the streets are lined with gold, according to Revelation. So what seems valuable to us here will not be valuable at all in eternity. So don't bring pavement to heaven with you. You don't carry anything in your hand. So nothing is going to be taken beyond the grave. Everything that we have is, as Solomon already said in chapter 2, it's going to be left to someone else. Or according to Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 through 12, it's all going to be consumed by fire, but it's not going to be yours. You're not going to have it. It reminds me of the real wealthy Texan that was bragging about his vast land, and he goes, invited the preacher over, and he said, "Preacher, as far as you can see that direction, that's all mine. And as far as you can see that direction, that's all mine. And as far as you can see that direction, that's all mine. And as far as you can see in that direction, that's all mine. I own all of that." And the preacher said, "How much of that do you own?" Well, there's the question. How much we may accumulate a lot in this earth, but it doesn't amount to anything. It can be easily lost. And as he says in the next point, verse 15, it's not going to be taken beyond the grave. And then he's got one more point to make about, he's continuing that one point, verse 16. This also is a grievous evil. Now, if you were marking your Bible, like I've got mine marked, then you've got the word evil. It's in verse 13. It's in verse 14. Now, again, it's in verse 16. So you're talking about treasures or money or riches, and he keeps using the word evil or bad with money. This is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus he will die. So what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? You're working hard exactly for what? What is the end goal of working so hard to accumulate all of this wealth? Because ultimately you die and it's left to someone else and you can't take it with you. So we should have the proper perspective about money. Again, and I know I've mentioned what Jesus said in Matthew 6:19 and following a number of times, but the eye needs to be good. The eye needs to be clear. The whole body will be full of light. What is your perspective on money? It should be, I'm going to lay up treasures in heaven. I'm going to use my money in order to advance God's cause. And then I'm laying up treasure in heaven. Because as Jesus said so succinctly in Matthew 6 and verse 24, you can't serve God and mammon. It's either God or it's money. And I always, as a boy, I thought, shouldn't that have said God or Satan? But it's God or it's money. Money is the flip side to what people worship. They're either going to worship God or they're going to worship money. So you're toiling after wind if you're trying to think of a way of getting more and more money, and that is getting the lion's share of a person's attention. And then verse 17, he makes one final point about money. Throughout his life, he also eats in darkness with great vexation, sickness, and anger. All right, so the loss of money brings great suffering. Solomon in the Proverbs would talk about how it's like money can sprout wings and it can be quickly gone. It can fly away. Here today, gone tomorrow type of thing. Well, when someone had money and they lost that money, it would have been better off for him to have been poor and stayed poor rather than have that taste of wealth and then lost that wealth, because now he knows both sides, and it brings a number of troubles. Solomon says he eats in, and that is a metaphor for he's living his life in darkness. This is a reference to misery. He is one that is just beating himself up, perhaps because of that bad investment or, or whatever. Although there are some scholars that say, well, I think we need to take this literally. And that is, he is so poor that he can't even afford a candle, or he is so poor that he can't even afford to put some oil in his little oil lamp, that he is just that poor. Well, that's certainly a possible interpretation of this. Second, Solomon says he has great vexation. Um, he is just frustrated to the max. He is just beating himself up, saying, if only I had done this, or if only I had done that, then maybe I wouldn't be in such bad shape. Well, that's never going to be healthy because it's too late now. What's been done is done. And then third, he says, in sickness. Worry creates other kind of physical problems and ailments. And that could very well be what is described here, that he is beating himself up and he's so this vexation of losing this money that he's literally making himself sick. You know, there have been people throughout history, and we read stories about this during the days of the Great Depression, that people committed suicide because they had lost all of their wealth. We also know stories and read about stories of men that gambled away all the money they had, and even used credit card debt. And so they lost all that they did own, and then they indebted themselves. Now they're really upside down. And now they're so miserable that at worst they take their own life, or they lose their job, they lose their family. They obviously have lost their possessions, maybe in order to pay off some of those debts. Their home is repossessed. There's great mental anguish that can produce genuine illness and sickness that comes from losing great sums of money. And then fourth, Solomon says it brings anger. Maybe this is anger that's directed toward himself. He's just mad at himself and what he has done. He had money, and because of his own foolishness, now he doesn't have money. And so that anger is directed toward himself. It's also possible, though, that the anger is directed toward God, that he is now blaming God for the fact that he is now in abject poverty, that it's God's fault that this has happened. But the fact of the matter is, his anger is only of his own doing. He loved money, he desired money, he misused money, and now he is reaping the consequences of what he has sown. So Solomon is painting such a vivid picture for us, a powerful image of a man that devoted his life to the accumulation of wealth. He got that wealth, and then it was quickly gone. And now you see him in such a pitiful condition. He is one that is sitting alone, apparently in darkness. He is full of emotional, spiritual, and physical anguish. He is one that is sick, physically for sure, mentally as well. Life has so much more to offer than this foolish chasing after wind goal that really describes so many people in this life. And why is it that when wealthy people die in their misery, and they even say that the money did not bring the happiness they thought it would, or the satisfaction they thought it would, that we somehow think that we would do better, that would not be what describes us if we suddenly came into a lot of money. Well, I think it's pretty clear what Solomon is saying is that is the thinking of a fool, that it's going to be different with me. I will handle money in a better way. All right, so as we move into verse 18, he wants to go back and basically restate his thesis that was stated in chapter 3 and in chapter 2 and verse 3. And that is life with God. What is life with God like? So as he concludes the sad story about riches, I mentioned that whole section did not mention God. Notice that? Well, this is another reason why it's good to mark your Bible, because what you would see is you've got this large section that has no mention of God at all, immediately followed by a section that again and again and again has the name of God. And so when you mark your Bible, you see little very interesting and educational things like that. So get your colored pencils and mark your Bible up, and you will be glad that you did. So Solomon is going to share two godly perspectives on wealth. First, learn to enjoy what you have and what you do. It would be better to never be rich than to expose yourself to the dangers of riches that he described in verses 10 through 17. But Solomon makes three observations about what you should enjoy. Now, there are 2 points. You need to enjoy it, was point number one. And then point number 2 comes from verse 19, but we'll get to there in a minute. So he says, enjoy what is good. Again, if you had your Bibles marked, this is one of our key words in the book. It is a worthwhile endeavor. It produces that which is ultimately good in the eyes of God. Good for yourself, good for others, good for the advancement of the work of God. So this is what I have seen, Solomon says, to be good. All right. So he's talking about a person that uses their life and their money, however much money they have, for that which is ultimately good. Second, he says it is fitting. This is the idea of proper. You know, there's a right way to use money and a wrong way to use money. We just got through talking about some of the wrong ways that money can be used, but there is a right, fitting, proper, God-accepted way of using money. And we'll talk some more about that in just a minute. And then he said, the last part of verse 18, for this is God's reward. It means that if one has been blessed by God, he ought to be content. He ought to appreciate those things that he has received from God. Because the fact of the matter is, you don't live long enough to have a bad attitude. You don't got enough time to have a bad attitude. So get rid of the stinking thinking, the negative attitude, the negative Nancy, and appreciate what's good about life. It's fitting. It's a reward from God. And Solomon says to eat, drink, and enjoy oneself in all of one's labor. So do you have some food? Be thankful. Do you have something to drink? Be thankful. Do you have a job? You have work? Be thankful in all the labor in which one toils under the sun during the few years of his life. So to repeat something that we talked about in the last part of chapter 2, or actually in the middle of chapter 2, after Solomon had done all of his research project, is be thankful that you're even capable of working. I know that I'll see people that are handicapped. Maybe they're in a wheelchair, and I know that they would give just about anything to be like me, where I'm fully capable of working. Well, that should uh, give us a good attitude in our lives to be thankful that we can work. And you notice Solomon doesn't even go down the path of what kind of work, because it doesn't matter. If you can work, then there should be happiness and thankfulness that you can work. So if it's a desk job, if you're digging ditches or you're cleaning toilets, if you can work, there should be an attitude of thankfulness for whatever job you are able to do. Work can be enjoyed by everyone, he says, under the sun. And so that's the attitude that we should have. All right. So, two perspectives on wealth. Perspective number one, let me see if I need to be advancing my slide here. So, what God has made is good is eating, drinking, and enjoying oneself and labor. And then he's got some other observations in verse 19. If one does have wealth, and in that is a, a stated truth, God hasn't given wealth to everyone. And so, by any objective standard, if you have a roof over your head, and I do, if you live in a dwelling that has running water, did you know that you are in the top 5% of all the people in the world if you have running water in your house? Do you have a floor that is something other than a dirt floor? Then if you do, then again, you are in, and I think it's 1% of all the people in the world. It might be 5% for that one too. But the fact is that you are in very slim category if you've got running water and you have something other than a dirt floor under your feet. Do you have food to eat every day? Well, again, you are one of the minorities of people in the world. Most people will have to go a couple of days without any food at all. And as I mentioned before, our trips to Africa, I've seen people that will will go into some villages and some remote locations, and we'll run into people that literally have not eaten anything for several weeks. Well, that's their reality. I'm so blessed to have that. So God has given us, if we have food and covering, if we have a roof over our heads, riches and wealth. So the perspective that man should have, and the attitude that he's going to talk about in 19 and 20. First of all, he says to eat from them. The New American Standard here says to enjoy oneself in all one's labor, which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life, which God has given him, for that is his reward. Verse 19, furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, right? That would be me. He has also empowered him to eat from them, to receive his reward, to rejoice in his labor. That is a gift from God. All right, so notice the observations that Solomon makes here about wealth. First of all, God has enabled you to eat from them. This means that God didn't give you what you have with the expectation that you give all of it away. You are expected to eat from them. If God blessed you with these things, then that means that God expects you to personally enjoy those things. So sometimes rich people, rich Christians, beat themselves up because they do have a nice house, they do have a nice car, or they do wear nice clothes. Maybe they're able to go on some nice vacations. Well, they should not be beating themselves up for those things, because this text says, as does also Paul in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 and 19, that God has given those who are rich these riches to enjoy. All right. Secondly, so he says to eat from them, to receive his reward. So the word reward here is in the idea of a blessing from God. A It's not a reward in the sense of being rewarded for being faithful, although in an Old Testament context, it certainly can mean that, because God promised to reward those who were faithful with wealth. That's not necessarily a New Testament promise, but the reward could find itself in just in the sense of a blessing. And then third, to rejoice in his labor. Now, it may very well be, and as a matter of fact, it probably is, that the reason that the person has wealth is because he had a good work ethic and he worked hard. And because of his hard work, he now has this accumulated wealth. It would kind of not fit Solomon's point to be making these statements about wealth when the person just inherited it all and he didn't work for any of it. The fact is, he has what he has because he was able to work. But see, the difference is, this is someone that has the God perspective. And so, yes, he worked for the money, but he's not patting himself on the back for that. He's praising God that he was able to work and through his work to accumulate the things that he has. And as Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28, you work so that you might have something to give. That's exactly the point also that Paul's making in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 18. To do good, to be generous in good works, to be ready to share. Wealth with God is a gift, and it can empower someone to get the most out of life. And then we're just about out of time, but I want to finish up chapter 5. He will not often consider the years of his life, because God has kept him occupied with the gladness of his heart. There are virtually two interpretations of this, and that is because he's worked hard and he has some good things, he's got some riches and wealth, time just seems to fly. His life is smooth without a whole lot of difficulties. Another perspective, and a number of commentators will go this direction, is the years of his life are in reflection of hard years. You've kind of moved past that. Maybe the person at one time in his past really struggled, but now he's doing much better. He's past those. He's now accumulated a level of wealth, and he was thankful that God was able to keep him occupied, keep him where he could have the physical strength and stamina to keep working. And now those bad days are behind him. Okay, we're done. Thank you so much for joining me in this study of Ecclesiastes. Next time we'll pick up with chapter 6 and verse 1. And God bless everyone.